Hey guys, so this is another video, this time about Tank Paladin in the vanilla and classic um, era versions of World of Warcraft. I want to showcase not only how to play it, but explain why it's a very competitive tank that stands firmly against Fury Prot Warrior for the #1 spot of best tank. And I understand that most hearing this are going to be skeptical. That's totally fine. The only thing I ask is that you guys are respectful in the comments and just to keep an open mind throughout this video. Um, Hopefully, the goal of this video is that by sharing this can inspire and give a good example to raid teams to adopt a paladin of their own, as well as give diehard paladins a nudge in the right direction of how to adapt towards the modern era of WoW. Um, so in this video, I do want to highlight the strengths and weaknesses, the talent options, the rotation, and then the overall raid feasibility of how to play it to the fullest. Um, a little background first. I've never mained a paladin before, but I've always played alongside them. So I've co-tanked with them in TBC as a Prot warrior and played alongside them as a Smite priest, as well as um, played with them as a fire mage in Arena for Wrath of the Lich King, where I found my initial inspiration, which was the Preg Paladin build, which was a sword and board style um, of Paladin that kind of did a little bit of everything, and it caught my eye, and I just thought it was very interesting. But I found myself wanting to try and emulate that in Season of Discovery with the talent and the rune system. And what I found was a viable build that actually worked extremely well in both versions of the game, being SOD and Era. Um, that was just an incredibly powerful tank option. So, after leveling a classic paladin in tanking raids firsthand, I found it not only extremely competitive among the other tanks, such as like Deep Prot or Druid, but I just found that it um, even was competitive against Fury Prot Warrior, which is known as the best tank in the era, um, where it can do a very similar job while bringing its own niches to the table. Um, that it could actually like reign as your first option in specific encounters, but it can also bring a lot to the table overall with proper support in the raid environment. But first, I want to dive into the main build that I use. This is going to be the 11-13-27. Most of the points are going to be into the Retribution tree because the Retribution tree is the main tree that increases your damage, um, your base damage, and that's what we're going to use to be amplified by our Righteous Fury in order for us to produce a lot of threat. So we're going to start out in the Protection tree. You're going to have a readout. This is just going to um, give you most of your mitigation. So whenever you tank multiple targets or you tank a boss and you get hit with a critical strike, this is going to give you a 30% block chance, which is going to help beef out your mitigation to help prevent you from being crit again. It's also going to help prevent you from being hit with a crushing blow. So 5 points in readout is always going to be a must-have. Next, we're going to have precision. This is going to increase your hit by 3%, which makes it far easier for us gearing to stay hit capped, which is going to be incredibly important because a lot of our damage is going to come from melee attacks, and it's also going to come from our seal damage, which comes off of those melee attacks that land. So 3 points in there is going to be really good. You need 9% hit to hit cap. So this talent is going to give us 3%. And then if we're a human with sword and mace skill, then this is going to give us another 3% hit, which is going to put us up to 6, meaning that we only need to gear 3% in order to get that final amount. Next, I take Guardian's Favor. You can go in 4 points and 2 points in toughness for 4% armor. but I find Guardian's Favor to just be a lot more reliable. Your Bop gets a 2-minute reduced cooldown, and then your Blessing of Freedom, I believe, only has 4 seconds of downtime, so it's a 20-second cooldown and it lasts for 16 seconds, which makes fights where you need to kite with some sort of consistent slow, it makes it makes you very capable of doing that. And then lastly, in the protection tree, we're going to be putting 3 points into our improved Righteous Fury. This is going to buff it up from 60% threat modifier to a 90% threat modifier, which is almost double. And then we move on into the Retribution tree, where Benediction, this is going to be a talent almost any paladin is going to take. This is just going to reduce the cost of Judgment and Seals. This just makes them more cost effective because you're going to be using them all the time, and the cheaper your abilities are, the more potent they become. So then we're going to take 2 improved Judgment because we will be judging very often, and we want to judge as often as possible. And even if we are in an encounter where we want to withhold our Judgment, it's better for it to be off cooldown and that be our choice than to be spamming, waiting for that to come up when we need a burst of threat. Next is going to be Deflection. So typically for this build, you do want to run as slow as a weapon as possible. In the next talent, we'll get into that. But the biggest reason is that parry is a phenomenal stat which will speed up your current melee swing by, I believe, 50 or 70%. So the slower the weapon that you have, the bigger and the larger amount of time that's going to get shaved off of that. So this will bring our parry up from 5% to 10%. And then whenever we add defense to our character, that's also going to increase that percentage. And then the big cornerstone of this build that all of these builds need to have in common is going to be Seal of Command. Seal of Command is the cornerstone of what makes this happen, and this gives Paladin a tremendous amount of burst potential. It gives it a tremendous amount of consistent threat, and it gives us a lot of flexibility on where to throw our threat around to with different targets. So Seal of Command, in short, is going to be one of the weapon seals that we use, which whenever you land a melee attack, have a chance to take 70% of that and reproduce it as holy damage. What makes Seal of Command so good is that all of the damage that it produces is also on the melee crit table, which means that you can do 70% of, you can do full weapon damage, and then 70% of that will proc, and then that 70 can also double and get its own separate critical strike. So, for example, if you swing your weapon and get a critical success on the white hit, you can also, that will get replicated into the holy damage, and that holy damage can also crit, giving you a ton of burst potential. Lastly, for this, the Judgment is also on the melee crit table, meaning that when you judge with this, it can also do double damage. This Judgment also, I believe, has an attack power and spell power coefficient, so no matter with what way you're gearing, this is always going to scale with you. And then the Judgment portion also does have a modifier where when you use it on a CC target, it does get double damage, which can lead to you being able to Judgment some targets in some cases and hit 12, like 1.2 or 1.3k Judgments, which turns into like 2k plus threat. Seal of Command is going to be a must-have. And then, as we just talked about how important crit is, we're going to take Conviction, which is going to increase our melee crit by 5%, and kind of keeping track of which crit is affecting what is also really important. So again, Seal of Command is going to get boosted by that, as well as your melee attack, which is going to be roughly about 50% or 40% of your damage anyway, which is really important. Next, I take Pursuit of Justice. This is going to give me 8% movement speed, which will free up my enchant slot on my boots, which can be more agi, which is crit and dodge, or it can be more stamina, which is what I personally run with, because having high health for this build seems to also be very nice for just keeping your damage intake smooth. And then we take Sanctity Aura. This is going to be our first talent that's going to modify our abilities. So this is going to increase the holy damage that you and your party deals by 10%. Um, which again, all holy damage that you produce is going to get that 90% modifier from Improved Righteous Fury. So we take Sanctity Aura here, and then we are going to, I throw 2 points into Improved Seal of the Crusader, because again, as a solo Paladin, typically it's going to be your responsibility to get Seal of the Crusader on the boss, which is going to be very big spell power boost. I think I run like 280 spell power on my Paladin currently, just a blue PvP set. And my Seal of the Crusader, I believe, gives me like 180 spell power, which is equivalent to having a Toep, Talisman of Ephemeral Power, active on your character at all times. And it's also like drinking a flask of Supreme Power, which I believe is like 150 spell power. So having like 170, 180 spell power just from this one buff, from one judgment cooldown, is an absolute must-have. So I put 2 points into this because I like to put the rest of my points into Improved Retribution Aura. In my experience, I have found it is extremely rare that you are going to have a Paladin who is one, playing Retribution, and two, if they are playing Retribution, for some reason they don't have Sanctity Aura. I don't necessarily understand it, but it's just kind of the reality of what you deal with playing with random players. So I like to take Improved Retribution Aura, because if I'm in a situation where a Paladin has Sanctity Aura to apply, and a Resistance Aura is not necessary or required for the encounter, I can put on Improved Retribution Aura, which is going to boost that damage from 20, 30, and then it's going to get that 90% from Righteous Fury, but it also scales off of Sanctity Aura. So while I'm having the talent that improves it to 30, Sanctity Aura is going to boost that up to 33, because it's giving me that 10%, which leads us into the last 2 talent points we put into Retribution Aura, which is going to be for Vengeance. This is going to give us 6% bonus to physical and holy damage. So combined, these two are going to give us 16% damage increase, which is still going to play into Retribution Aura. That's going to play into Seal of Command, which is going to boost the weapon damage that you do by 6%, which is then going to spit out a larger number. That will be 70% holy damage, and then that will also double dip and get another 6% bonus on top of that. And both of those damage values are going to be capable of critting, and they can both crit independently. But Vengeance is just what opens up all of our toolkit, because this 16% modifier is also going to work for an ability like Consecrate. So now it's going to make our AoE threat 16% more potent and give us a higher incentive to want to have more agility on our character. So now, with our last 11 points, we're just going to go ahead and get to that. So we do take Divine Intellect, just because the more int that you have, the more mana you have, the longer that you can use your abilities and stave off until your next mana potion or dark rune is available. And then instead of Divine Strength, we're going to take Improved Seal of Righteousness. And while I understand that this talent only affects base damage of the seal and judgment, it still turns out to be some impressive damage, especially in the case of the judgment, where it has a lot higher of a base value. And so that getting boosted by 15% and then put into the modifier of Improved Righteous Fury actually makes this still pretty impressive. So even though it's not going to scale with spell power, it is still going to scale very nicely with the modifiers that we have. So we have 15% of our base Seal of Righteousness, which gets increased, which may not be the most, but once you plug that into 16% from these 2 talents, Now that modifier goes even further when you then take that modifier and plug it into Improved Righteous Fury, and then we're going to take Consecrate. And this is going to be the main build that you are going to run. It does a little bit of everything. Again, you're going to have high parry, so you're going to be swinging your slow weapon at a very moderate pace, especially if you are in AoE situations. And then Seal of Command, which again, I'll touch on. Paladin, all specs of damage dealing paladins only work if you Seal Twist, meaning that you are overlapping your uptime of Seal of Righteousness on your weapon, and you're overlapping it with the uptime of Seal of Command. This is going to make it so that when you strike with your weapon, you are going to roll the dice on getting Seal of Command damage, which is capable of critting, and you're also going to get the consistent damage of Seal of Righteousness, which is still going to be giving you a large majority of your threat, and you're going to be judging. I personally judge whichever judgment is available. So while I'm Seal Twisting, if it lines up to where Seal of Command is going to be active when my judgment is ready, then I will use a max rank Seal of Command, which costs the same amount as a max rank Seal of Righteousness. And so I will just switch back and forth. Sometimes I max judge Righteousness, sometimes I max judge Seal of Command. It just makes it a lot easier for me switching back and forth with Seal Twisting. But again, Seal Twisting is so essential because now with Vengeance, you're going to be increasing your uptime because your weapon swing is capable of critting, your Seal of Command is capable of critting, and then your Judgment of Righteousness or Judgment of Command is also capable of critting, while also they do similar damage. But you must Seal Twist. If you do not Seal Twist, you are setting yourself up for failure when it comes to tanking as a Prot Paladin or any Paladin in general. Have to Seal Twist. It is something that you will need to practice, and something that will help you tremendously in dungeons, in raids, just in every way that you can imagine. Seal Twisting is worth it and is also extremely cheap to do. The next build that I want to get into is going to be the 11-29-11. This is the build that you're going to use if you have another Paladin to provide the Sanctity aura boost for your character. If you do not have a Sanctity aura boost for your character, this build will be a liability in a raid scenario. Primarily because you'll just be missing out on 10% base damage that would otherwise be able to help you maintain threat in a lot of situations. Keep in mind this build on its own comparatively to the 11-13-27 is that your Consecrate is going to be 16% weaker, so you will not have as strong of AoE. However, if you have a Paladin providing Sanctity aura for you, you will only be missing 6% of that AoE output, which is still going to be very, very impressive compared to any other tank option. You are still going to hold very, very well over AoE DPS with a weaker Consecrate, as well as being able to use Dynamite to compensate if needed. But getting into this build, you're also just going to be running the same Holy Tree. This is going to be Divine Intellect, Improved Seal of Righteousness, Consecration. The main difference that you'll see in this build between a Deep Prot build is that we do not take Holy Shield. Holy Shield is just a liability all around because it is very expensive to use. The mitigation is very inconsistent, and you ideally want it to overlap with Readout, which happens when you are critically struck, but they don't line up very nicely together, especially if you're on the GCP, and your character only has a 5% chance of being critically struck, which means that you end up just having a lot of downtime on this ability, and if you have a lot of uptime on the ability, you are just running yourself lower on mana as well as eating your GCDs, in order to be able to seal twist, to be able to judge, to be able to um, reapply seals or drop your consecrate as needed. So that is why we don't run Holy Shield. But biggest issue is that if you take Holy Shield, you are incapable of getting Seal of Command, which again, seal twisting is what makes Paladin capable of tanking and dealing effective damage. So you are going to take 5 of 5 Benediction. Again, mana is very important. You will take your improved judgment so that you can continue to throw these judgments out consistently. And we're going to take 3 points in deflection to get to Seal of Command. Now, you may notice that we're taking 3% parry instead of 5 of 5 parry, which I said was very important. But that's no issue because in the defensive tree, we are taking the defense skill, which is going to be giving us roughly that same amount of parry back, as well as avoidance in other cases. Usually, Paladin wanted to avoid defense because it prevented us from getting uptime on our redoubt ability so that we could get bonus block to then overlap it with our Holy Shield. However, because Paladin is dealing damage primarily to generate their threat, it is of no consequence to have a higher defense. Defense is only going to give you more avoidance, and it's going to actually smooth out the damage that you take because you'll be crit less often. Being crit is not the end of the world, but again, if defense is a stat that comes your way, we're not turning up our nose at it. So taking the defense skill, to me, is actually really essential because it helps me save in places for gear where I would have to use a little bit of defense mandatorily to where I can actually shed off maybe a piece or two containing defense in favor of something that might give me more threat if I need it. With that, blocking, while it is probably our main form of mitigation, it is not that essential. We just need the block itself. We don't need the damage that it sponges up. So protection tree is going to look primarily the same going up to improved righteousness, except that we do take Blessing of Kings, which I'll come back around to in a second. But these two talents, Reckoning and One Hand Specialization, are what make this build so strong. This is going to be the best single target build that you can have in the game for Paladin, as long as you have a Paladin providing you with Sanctity Aura. Because, again, base damage is what is so important. So you're going to have 10% damage from Sanctity Aura. You're going to have the 10% parry from deflection and defense. And then, anytime that you are critically struck, you are going to get Reckoning, which is going to immediately finish your weapon swing and start the next one. So you'll start to attack faster, similar to parry, except instead of it just boosting your current swing, it's just going to immediately finish it. And what makes that so important is that it works really, really well into one-handed specialization, which increases the damage that you deal with one-handed melee weapons by 8%, which is going to be the physical side of your melee weapon, and similar to Vengeance. However, what's hidden on the tooltip is that it also increases the seal damage associated with your weapon, which means that your Seal of Righteousness, for example, will hit 8% harder, and your melee weapon itself, the white damage, is also going to hit 8% harder. So anything involving your Seal and Judgment is going to get boosted by this 8%, which is what makes it so strong in single target, is that you're going to have 18% damage increase from your weapon all the time, and you're going to be getting extra swings from Reckoning, because again, you're still going to be using a slow weapon, so you're going to be getting instant attack swings. You're also going to be getting faster overall attack swings through your parry, and you're going to be seal twisting, which is going to benefit from this 8% increase on both sides of the equation. To Blessing of Kings, which is going to be our other method of generating threat. Traditionally, what Paladins would do is that they would use the greater blessing version, they would use greater blessings in order to generate their threat with buff threat. So because our blessings are holy spells, they get modified by the improved Righteous Fury. Meaning that I believe Blessing of Kings, when you buff a player with a blessing, it produces about 114 threat. And so if I were to buff myself with Blessing of Kings, I would produce 114 threat. But if I was in a raid where there were 10 paladins and I were to use this ability for that same global, I would, instead of producing 114 threat, I would then produce 1,114 threat from every character that's been blessed in that global. And so paladins, what they would do is they would just bring in a bunch of resources to spam this ability, and they would just spam that ability from start to finish in a boss encounter while using wisdom in order to give themselves as much mana as possible to keep that going. The problem, however, is that that has very niche uses, and while it is tremendous threat, has too many factors for it to be consistently used by paladins. For example, if there is an encounter that has multiple targets in it, such as Lucifron or the Lava Rock guy in Molten Core that drops the Mage Blade, or even Major Domo where there's multiple targets, what happens is that threat gets split per target. So if there's 3 targets, instead of generating almost 1,200 threat per, now I'm generating 400 threat on each monster, which would be 400 threat on the dog, 400 threat on the boss, 400 threat on the other dog, which would make it very, very difficult for paladins to be able to generate a lot of threat in a main tank situation, because now their threat is being split amongst every mob in the encounter, making them next to useless when you have a higher mob count in fights such as Gar, fights like Major Domo. It just really, really complicates things, and it's a very clunky way to generate threat. This is why this build is so important, because you can have Blessing of Kings to generate that threat, but you also have all of these damage modifiers to also back that up and give you not only a very consistent method of generating threat through damage, but also gives you the ability to produce damage, which is the biggest downfall of Paladin, in my opinion. Because even though Blessing of Kings spam is very, very high threat and very, very capable in situations, you do find yourself having to compete with a Fury Prot Warrior on the other side, who is generating incredible threat as well, but is also dealing the damage of almost equivalent to a warrior DPS, where they're helping kill the boss significantly faster because they can deal so much damage. There are still pros and cons to this, and as you'll notice, the other build, the 11-13-27, does not have Blessing of Kings, and that's because we just use a different blessing, which is a bit more expensive. It does generate about the same threat, it does generate the exact same threat, but we just aren't able to cast it as often as they can with Kings. Kings, I believe, is 150 threat, whereas Blessing of Light or Blessing of Might or other things like that are going to be closer to the 200 range or 220, 240 range for mana cost. So this build, again, is going to be the best single target build as long as you have a paladin that's able to give you Sanctity Aura. If you don't have Sanctity Aura, then this is going to be the best build that you have, which is going to be the 11-13-27. This is the self-sufficient build, but again, you do miss out on the greater of Blessing of Kings spam, but you do just have to use other blessings in its place. Primarily Light is what I use, just because we don't take improved Might or anything like that. The next thing I want to touch on to is where you can get Sanctity Aura from. So Ret Paladins typically aren't brought into raids because of their lower damage, and because players that tend to play Retribution Paladin don't necessarily um, aren't the most capable players. So what you can do, because you do have options, is that if you can't find a Ret Paladin who is willing to play with you and provide you Sanctity Aura, you can actually get Sanctity Aura through a Holy Paladin if they really, really like you. Um, what I mean by that is that if most Paladins do not use Holy Shock, and this was something that I would do with Holy Paladins that I knew while playing my Smite Priest, is that if they like you enough, they will run a talent build where they don't take um, Holy Shock and instead will run Sanctity Aura for you. And then you two can be grouped together and deal all the damage that you need to deal. You can provide the resistance buff, and then they can give you the Sanctity buff that you need. So again, they would go down into the Holy Tree far enough to get all of their crit chance and all of their mana replenishment and divine favor, and then they would dump the rest of those 21 points into um, Sanctity Aura. And if they really really like you, they probably don't. Um, they could even provide the Seal of the Crusader for you, at least in openers, and then you can just throw up your own. Um, But again, they take Pursuit of Justice and the Improved Might, um, Improved Retribution Aura. Maybe they like other tanks more than you. Who knows? And then Sanctity Aura. So if you have a Holy Paladin that really, really likes you, because Holy Paladins are going to be a lot more common in a raid, you can actually have one that will run Sanctity Aura for you, be in your party, and then you can run the um, majority protection build, which will let you have the most damage and threat possible through Sanctity Aura, but also the biggest benefit and single target capability of one-handed specialization and Reckoning, as well as Blessing of King spam. Again, while you do lose the potential of Blessing of Kings from your Holy Paladin, you gain it right back by having your tank, who's going to be having it anyway if he's running the one-handed specialization build. Okay, so right here, we have the example for the rotation. This is, it can look a little bit different every time, but this is just kind of showing how your rotation is going to kind of look if you're in the bursting phase, which is going to be like your typical opener. This could be done for dungeons, this could be done for bosses, but the big difference that you'll probably notice is that for bosses, you'll find yourself taking advantage of the Judgment's 10-yard range and just throwing that immediately, putting your seal back up, probably Righteousness, or Seal of the Crusader, dropping Consecrate immediately, and then twisting at the end of that swing. But in this case, I'm just going to show where you open with Seal of Command, and then an easy way to twist, again, practice, do this, but an easy way to have good burst if you're walking into a mob is to have your seal going. So in this case, I have rank 1 Seal of Command up, and then I'm going to apply, once I get into melee range, I'm going to apply Seal of Righteousness, max rank, onto the target, which then I can immediately judge and then get my next seal going or get Consecrate up. So right here, I walk into the mob, I hit my toe up, and right as I'm about to start my melee swing, I'm going to hit my Seal of Righteousness right there, which you see immediately. I get the 152 damage, which is from the Seal of Righteousness. And if you look at my buffs, you can actually see that both of these are overlapped right now. I actually have both buffs active. And Seal of Command is actually going to give me a crit immediately, which is also going to activate Vengeance. So now, while I have my Talisman of Ephemeral Power active, now all of my abilities and melee swings are going to be 6% stronger. Um, so now I'm going to judge, I'm going to get my Seal of Command up, And since I don't have enough time to get righteousness up because I'm on the GCD, now I'm going to drop Consecrate, which is still going to benefit from the POEP, and it's also going to benefit from that 6% damage increase because Consecrate ticks every 1 second. And then when my next swing comes around, that's when I'm going to go back into righteousness. So now the Consecrate comes down, and then right before this little green tick comes up, which is when my weapon swing is going to go off, I'm going to hit righteousness, which is going to benefit from Vengence, which is still active, and the Toep. And then you'll see I twist, I pop Seal of Righteousness, and then I still get some damage out of that. And now I'm set up to where my Judgment's going to be coming back off cooldown. So I'm going to Seal Twist into a high command there. So you can see the Judgment goes off, I get 275 damage, my weapon swing goes off, and then now I Judge, which is going to let me get my Seal of Command back up, which is going to put me back on the GCD. So then I go right back into Consecrate as my next global, and then I'm going to twist again, and then I'm going to twist a high max rank Seal of Command because my Judgment is ready. So now I'm going to activate that so that I can Judge immediately, and then I have 3 seconds on my Consecrate until that comes back up. And now that's another crit from my sock proc right there. And then now he's in execute range, but we're just going to keep this going. And then I get a crit there on my melee swing. And that's going to be burst rotation of what that looks like for Paladin. And again, typically you won't use Consecrate like that nonstop. That's just what I did just to kind of show you the flexibility of what that rotation is going to look like depending on your weapon speed and depending on what you're dealing with. Typically, where you'll change that in your rotation is that you'll actually, instead of using Consecrate for any global that you are where you have wiggle room in your seal twisting, that's actually where you're going to hit your greater blessing spam. So that's either going to be greater blessing of light or greater blessing of salvation or greater blessing of kings, depending on what your groups and comp looks like. So in between that rotation, you're going to be getting non-damage threat from your greater blessing, which you're going to be weaving in between seal twisting from the damage that you deal. So next, I do want to touch on some of the pros and cons of Paladin, and that's going to be that in this build, their single target and AoE threat is going to be extremely effective. No other tank really has the toolkit to match their AoE potential, but when it comes to single target through this build, they're also going to be matching again the top ends of threat, which is going to be similar to what Fury Prot can do. The first con, this one really only matters for early phases like MC and Ani and stuff like that. And it's going to be that early raid gear, uh, the early raid gear for them is really going to come from the deeper bosses. So this is going to be stuff like the weapon coming from Gar, the bracers from Domo. Ragnaros is going to have the tier pants. It's going to have the Band of Acura. It's going to have the Malisar's Offender, so their ideal shield. And then like a Nixia, depending on RNG, you're going to want the tier helmet and the cloak from that. So just if your raid's not able to clear, starting from like week 1, week 2, whatever, that can be something that kind of drags on for you. The next pro is going to be touching on that, is that PvP offers a very direct and straightforward gear progression for your character. So that's going to be the blue set from PvP when you go up to rank 11, and that will carry on even when the rest of the ranks become available, when you can get the purple set, if you can get the shield and the weapons. The sword is going to be fantastic for single target. And none of that gear competes with any other players. So again, your gear competition is really, really low for like impacting your fellow tanks, impacting your fellow Fury Prot warriors. And a lot of your upgrades are going to come from outside systems, which are going to be like PvP and such. The next con, while this is kind of true for every single class in spec, but we are going to be consumed dependent. So this is going to be like your flask of supreme power for spell power, um, and all of your melee and caster consumes, which does become a big laundry list when you have to think about mana potions and dark runes and MP5 potions and elixir of mongoose, armor potions, all those different things, which melee have a very, very big laundry list of consumes, and Paladin does kind of get the edge that we do have access to the caster consumes like spell power, which does let us have um, more potions that increase our potency. But it still comes as a con just because that is a very long grocery list of things have to have prepared for your character, because you do feel the difference when you don't have them. Um, the next pro that I want to touch on to is going to that our threat per second is extremely front loaded. So this is especially going to be an edge when it comes to situations where um, filling up your rage bar before the boss encounter isn't going to be necessarily possible due to just the mob surrounding it, or just if there's RP before the boss, or if it's the first boss. For example, if you do like, I don't know, hard mode on Hakar or something. Um, but your threat is going to be very, very front loaded, and a majority of your threat does not require the mob's focus. So we do make really, really good off tanks. Our threat does improve if we are the main focus, because again, we're going to be getting things like Reckoning if you're using Prot build, and then you're also going to be getting Parry Haste to be hitting a lot faster to get even more threat out. But when it comes to off tanking, you are going to be able to generate a lot of threat really, really fast, even if you don't have the boss, where a lot of other tanks stall out. The next con, though, is going to be kind of touching on that, is the pacing our mana will limit our threat longevity, as in like we aren't able to do our maximum threat rotation all of the time for the entire duration of the fight. If the fight's short enough and you're using dark runes and mana potions, you absolutely can get away with this. But typically, especially on long fights, Consecrate is going to be one of the first abilities to go, and the rest of our rotation is very, very mana efficient. So Steel Twisting is not that bad, but it is just really going to be whether or not we can spam Consecrate depending on the length of the duration. Whereas Fury Prot is again going to be able to do its maximum production for the entire duration of the encounter. And then my last pro here, this is again just touching on the big ones, is that we can generate threat through immunities and from a distance. So one of the best fights, two of the best fights that this is going to be an advantage is going to be for Onyxia, where we can buff spam while she's in the air, or judgment her while she's in the air, and produce a lot of threat before she comes down, so that we can pick her up every single time, which makes Paladin tank really, really good for solo tanking on that. And also for the immunity side, which is going to be for Nefarian, for example. Paladin tank is hands down the best tank for Nefarian, because we can generate threat that's going to be similar to Fury Prot, but also we have the least lethal class call. And if the Paladin class call does happen, which is to put a Blessing of Protection on the boss and make him physical immune, we can still generate threat through it with a variety of ways. So, Fury Prot, if they get their class call, they're going to be swapped into Berserker Stance, which is going to make them take 20% increased damage. They're also not going to be able to block or use any defensives, and it's usually a very scary point for a lot of healers in order to survive that. Druid, it's going to be a very similar thing, where they get kicked out of bear form into cat form, where they lose a lot of their health and armor values, and then they're a druid already, so they can't use any sort of like consumes or anything without having like power shift for it, which is very sketchy. So again, Paladin, especially when it comes to fights like Nefarian, they just are the best tank all around, because again, they aren't taking an insane amount of damage. They don't have to use Death Wish like abilities in order to do that, but it does come at the cost that they will do less damage of a Fury Prot by comparison. The last con here that I want to touch on is that paladins have no taunt. And while this is true, and for a lot of players can seem very very scary, uh, in practice it really isn't as bad as you think. Um, for example, I played a hunter tank in Wrath of the Lich King, and the pet taunt was a 2-minute ability, so it wasn't something that you could use very very often. Um, but uh, they were such an effective tank that you rarely had to even taunt. Um, what makes Paladin so effective, even though they don't have a taunt, is that they generate very, very consistent threat, and that they can still shine in a lot of encounters that come to people's minds when they think of taunts being very important. And again, don't get me wrong, taunts are very, very useful. They help a lot, especially in the case of warrior and druid, where you can be behind on threat and help you catch up. Um, But again, for Paladin, some of the fights that come to mind are going to be like Firemaw or the Four Horsemen. Four Horsemen, Classic is really good and well designed in the way that a lot of the encounters seem to be made with the tank potentially not having a taunt available to them. So for Horsemen, for example, when you need to rotate your tanks due to the AoE debuff, that debuff on that tank is actually going to drop their threat over time, to where when it's time to transition from one tank to the next, um, it's actually going to be very, very easy to pick up that next mob through damage or through buff spam even, um, in order to do the tank swap. And then for Firemaw, Paladin is going to be, it ideally would need to be the main tank to be the most effective for that fight, where you use your warriors and your druids to then taunt the wing buffet off of the Paladin. Um, that way Paladin can generate the most threat possible, and then they would just hold the boss, and then your off tanks can grab it as they need to. Um, an important thing, or something that you can do, which won't happen very consistently, is through engineering, we do get target dummies, which do have a taunt. It is going to be very critical for you to have these type of items or target dummies on you. Um, but there has been a case where I have had to throw a target dummy down to the side of the boss because of a taunt resist in order to get the target dummy to eat the wing buffet for me so that I did not have my threat reset. Um, but also, another way that you can do this is that as the boss is about to cast Wing Buffet, is that you can actually put a Blessing of Protection on yourself, so that the boss will then turn towards the off tank, and then hit them with the Wing Buffet, and anyone that it hits, it'll reset their threat, and then the boss will just come back to you by just using the cancel macro and picking it up. If you do happen to get hit by Wing Buffet, you're not out of the fight, because again, you can still generate a lot of threat when you're not the focus. And so even if you are dropping your stacks, your fire stacks, if you're standing outside of the raid, you can actually just buff spam on your raid to build up a lot of threat, even while you don't have uptime on the boss. So again, Paladin is really, really good, and its toolkit's really just limited down to the mana. And I haven't even gotten into innovating and things like that. This is a very compact and self-sufficient class. While I understand taunts, not having a taunt is scary, they have a lot of tools Paladin does in order to combat and overcome a lot of those, and mechanics really do seem to help them out when it comes to that. All right, and just to try and wrap everything up here, because this video is super, super long despite my best efforts. Unfortunately, I just feel like I just kept hearing from people that they just didn't know anything about Paladin. So I feel like I needed to cover pretty much almost all of the basics for the people who might be new to seeing this for the first time, people who are trying to figure out how to implement this into their raid team, um, and for the existing paladins who probably didn't even know that a route of dealing damage for threat production even existed. So I'm going to try and speed run these last ones. Right here I do have the um, in quotations ideal group comp for a paladin and what it can look like. So in group one, right here I have the Prot Paladin, this is going to be you, whether you're running the um, Prot build or the 11, 13, 27. You're going to be giving one of these auras to your group, whether that be a resist aura, whether that be Sanctity aura. You're going to have your other paladin, whether that be a holy or a ret, going to be giving you again the Sanctity aura or the resist aura, depending if you have friends. Um, and then one of the things that most tanks don't really get to take advantage of is if there is a warlock that uses an imp, you can get the Blood Pact buff, which is a stacking stamina buff that does work independently from all the other ones. And typically casters aren't really utilized because you just cram all the warriors together in rogues with hunters for True Shot aura and just call it a day. So again, if you have a warlock with an imp, that is going to be really big for you because the more health again just makes you tanky. And then a feral druid for the 3% melee crit is going to also go very, very far because that is going to help increase your vengeance uptime. So if you can get as much crit as possible, you're going to have more damage and more threat over a long period of time. And then finally, you're going to have Battle Shout from a warrior or True Shot aura from a hunter. They really are kind of the same. Attack power is not our biggest stat, but again, any attack power that we get will scale with our Seal of Command Judgment and our Seal of Command attacks because we do get weapon damage from it. So it does, still do something. As an honorable mention, I did want to throw in that if you do have a Discipline Priest that likes to Holy Nova in AoE situations. If they are in the group, you can then get free healing in AoE situations that does not cost any threat. And then while they don't need to be in your group necessarily, if you do receive a power infusion from them, which is a 20% spell damage buff, you can also do even crazier threat with that. It's basically like magical death wish, except it doesn't come with a negative of having increased damage or reduced armor or resistance for doing it. And then finally, if you have, depending on your comp, if you do have like a ton of paladins, um, and you don't really have any of these anything available, such as like a warlock or spare hunter, or all the warriors just magically fit in all the other groups, you can just stuff another paladin in there, and that paladin can just throw up like retribution aura or something like that because any holy damage that you get is going to be very impactful even in single target situations where I believe base red ore is going to do like 7% of your damage, 10% if it's increased, somewhere around there, um, which is still a pretty big threat boost. But um, other thing I wanted to go over really fast while I still I'm closing out this video is that there are a few consumes that are super essential. The first one I'm gonna throw them on screen is going to be Dragon Breath Chili. This is probably one of your strongest consumes that you can have as a paladin. What it does is that whenever you um, hit a target, you have a chance to just basically do like a big AoE cleave. This hits an infinite number of targets, but what makes this so good is for two reasons. One is that it has a 100% spell power coefficient, so that every time this procs, it's going to do the damage equivalent to your spell power added on top and hit everyone. So for my paladin, I think in Molten Core, it was hitting for like 400, 500, and I believe it's capable of critting, but I don't recall. I'm too lazy to check. Um, but Dragon Breath Chili, you can eat your buff food first, and then eat the Dragon Breath Chili afterwards. And for that duration, you are going to get these damage procs when you do it. And what makes Paladin so special for this is not only does it scale with spell power, but Seal of Righteousness actually increases, it doubles the uptime of on hit effects. So with you having Dragon Breath Chili, Seal of Righteousness counts as its own melee attack. So you're actually going to proc this more often than other classes can, and you're going to do far more damage than most other classes using this can do. And it's going to hit for like 400, 500 damage very easily. It's a ton of damage, especially in cleave and AoE situations, and it's an absolute powerhouse when it comes to a raid. Um, the other consumes I want to touch on are magic candles. These come from the kobolds, the kobold geomancers in the starting area outside of Stormwind. These have a 12% spell power coefficient, but the main reason you're using this is because it actually has a 40-yard range fireball to pull mobs and get initial threat. You're not going to use these very, very often, and they're really of no consequence. Most times I will use this will be in raid trash. If there's the goblins that I'm tanking in DWL, I can just pop them with the candle. They'll run to me around the corner. I already have Consecrate going. Um, and I'm also generating threat with Seal of Righteousness. So Magic Candle is really good. You don't really need it for dungeons. The 10-yard range on Judgment pretty much it covers all bases there. But it is really critical to have, especially in a raid situation. And then the final consume I want to touch on is the Elemental Sharpening Stone. This is going to give you 2% crit on your weapon. Pop it on. Uh, I would not recommend bothering with the Frost Oil or the Shadow Oil. Um, you can consider those options if you are the Prot build, but if you are the Vengeance build, I would not bother because 2% crit is going to give you more uptime on that damage, and also all of your abilities critting will still do double damage like your Seal of Command procs and your Judgments, so on and so forth. So I did want to touch on that because I feel like a lot of Paladins are probably still going to try and gravitate toward weapon oils. And then once ZG comes out, whenever you watch this video, if the Brilliant Wizard Oil is available, that is what you will transition into, which is going to be the spell power and crit imbuement on your weapon. Um, Absolutely going to want that. Raid buffs are essential. Your character is going to be incredibly powerful because you can utilize all of these buffs and all of the little like niche things that they give off. Um, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was one I was looking forward to making. Um, and let me know in the comments if you try it out, what your concerns might be. I'll try and answer you guys' comments as best I can. Again, keep respectful. If you've made it this far, hopefully you stay open-minded about it. Even if you're a raid leader thinking about how to introduce this into your raid or what boss fights it would be good for, drop a comment down below. There's a lot of more information that I could have put into this, but again, I wanted this as short as possible. I wanted to make this a 20-minute beautiful video and said it's like an hour. So thank you guys so much for watching. Yeah, Paladin is way better than anybody thought. Um, Seriously, try it out. I hope you guys really enjoy it. Thank you for watching. Peace.